Hey everybody, welcome to week 12, and we're going to be spending some time talking about environmental health. I want to start off with just a quick presentation. This is actually a summary of a presentation that is given online by Dr. John McDougall. He talked about what killed the entrepreneur Steve Jobs. So first of all, Steve Jobs, I'm sure you all know who he is, co-founded Apple Computers. Literally revolutionized the field of technology. He also co-founded Pixar Studios. My wife and I are big fans of those movies. Been watching them since even before our son was born. In 2003, Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He delayed the surgery initially until 2004 because he was interested in trying to treat it with diet and other forms of alternative medicine, including acupuncture. In 2009, he did finally so he got the surgery in 2004. In 2009, he got a liver transplant and then passed away 2 years later, unfortunately. Jobs was a vegetarian most of his life. He followed a strict vegan diet, primarily due to spiritual and ethical concerns. Um, so again, as I said, Jobs was a vegan most of his life. Several sources, including Harvard, claim that most diseases can be prevented using a plant-based diet. There's a lot of evidence that says that pancreatic cancer has been linked to excessive saturated fat in the diet, primarily from animal sources. So a plant-based diet typically would protect somebody against cancer. So um, a lot of critics claim that vegetarian diet probably causes cancer. He followed wasn't just a vegan diet. A couple times he was on a fruitarian diet, a strict fruit diet, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It's got too much sugar in it, but again, probably not the main cause of his death. His partner was a man named Steve Wozniak, excuse me. Pretty heavy-set guy, as you can see. He's still alive, so a lot of times the comparisons are made between the two men. Why would Steve Jobs bother following a vegetarian diet when apparently it didn't do him any good? There was a 60 Minutes interview with Jobs' biographer. His name is Walter Isaacson. And in that interview, Isaacson claimed that if Jobs had listened to his doctor and not and gotten the surgery immediately, then he could have been cured of the cancer. He also uh, claimed that, which he did, Jobs tried to cure his cancer with diet and other types of alternative medicine. And again, he suggested that by delaying the surgery 9 months, Jobs probably caused his own death. Jobs did live with regret for the remainder of his life. Again, some of his doctors even suggested that he could have been saved if he had gotten the surgery immediately. And the interviewer, I can't remember, Steve Croft, said a couple different times, how could he be so stupid as to do something like that, which is really a shame that somebody would make that kind of comment to somebody that was essentially, I don't know if he was a genius, but he was a very motivated individual. At the time of his diagnosis in 2003, Jobs' tumor was likely to be about 1 centimeter. That's about the size that that the tumor needs to be about 1 centimeter, or excuse me, centimeter to be picked up by the screening technology. So death typically occurs with a tumor mass of about 4 inches. So um, they have a thing. It's called doubling time, cancer doubling time. So under certain conditions, cancer cells will start to divide and double until it becomes a large tumor mass. When a tumor is 1 millimeter in size, it contains 1 million cells. When it's 1 centimeter in size, it contains a billion cells. So at the time of his diagnosis, his tumor was about 1 centimeter. 8 years later, it was about 10 centimeters. Okay, so if a tumor is the size of a tumor is known at two different points in time, the doubling time can actually be calculated. So based on this doubling time calculation, they were able to calculate out that the first cancer cell probably became cancerous at around the age of 24. Okay, so again, surgery findings in 2004 revealed that not only was there cancer in the pancreas, but it also had metastasized into the liver. So for cancer to spread to the liver, it actually has to go through the bloodstream first. So again, just some more information about doubling time. The liver cancer probably started around 27, at age 27. 1987, there were reports that he had essentially jaundice, liver disease. A couple times he complained of back pain, abdominal and back pain, at least 5 years prior to the diagnosis. If you look at this picture, so they thought it was kidney stones, and if you look at these picture here, that these are the kidneys here, but the tip of the liver is actually right next to the kidneys. So it was actually probably the cancer that was causing the pain, not the kidney stones. Um, so the underlying cause actually probably was the fact that he was exposed to so many heavy metals while working in the computer industry. He started working in the computer industry at age 15 and was exposed to things like cadmium, arsenic, lead. Um, and exposure to lead is a known risk factor for pancreatic cancer. This is a picture of somebody doing soldering. I actually used to do this years ago. Now, the type of solder I used was lead-free solder, but that was a relatively new invention when I started using it. Back then, when Jobs was doing this, he was using solder that was contained lead. So this is a solder pen, and basically what you do, and this is the solder right here, and basically what you do is heat up the solder, and it melts onto the computer board, sticking the components in place. As you're doing this, you have like smoke basically coming up into your face as you're doing this. So he was basically exposing himself to lead as in the computer while he worked in the computer industry. 5 year survival rate for pancreatic cancer, not very good. That should say 3.3%, not 3.3 years. So in other words, almost 97% of the men, 97% of the people diagnosed with pancreatic cancer are dead within 5 years. Jobs lived for 8 years after his diagnosis. So, although it's been suggested that he may have been saved if he had not delayed that surgery, he that probably wasn't true. In all likelihood, he was probably. It sounds horrible to say this, but he was probably dead. There was probably nothing that they could have done to save him. Um, the vegan diet had nothing to do with his death. In fact, he probably lived as long as he did due to the fact that he was on a vegan diet, even though, again, his diet was not probably not optimal. So, again, feel free to check out these references. And if you want to watch the whole video, it's about an hour long. I just did a quick 5-minute summary of it, but just Google, you'll find it on YouTube. John McDougall, What Killed Steve Jobs. Kind of interesting. So some more information I wanted to present on environmental health. This is a summary of a report that was put together by the National Institute of Health. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I'll basically give you a high-end overview. And this file is available underneath our course documents as well. So 2010, the President's Cancer Panel in the National Institute of Health sent a report to President Obama summarizing the current health risks from associated with the environmental toxic load to which we're all exposed to. So there's some stats there on how many people are going to have cancer, how much money we spend on cancer. The main point here is that there are nearly 80,000 chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis, the majority of which are understudied or have never been studied, and most of these chemicals are unregulated. The biggest concern that the NIH pointed out was something called bisphenol A, or BPA, which is still found in a lot of different products. So I'm going to recommend that you start trying to reduce your exposure to this chemical. Primarily it's found in canned foods and a lot of plastics. So we'll talk about how to reduce your risk of exposure. Again, some more stats on cancer. A lot of research has been done, looking at genetic or immune or endocrine dysfunction that may lead to cancer, but there hasn't been very much research, unfortunately, on environmental factors. Especially when we compare it to how much research has been done on genetics. This is a quote directly from the report. The prevailing regulatory approach in the U.S. is reactionary rather than precautionary. A hazardous substance must be incontrovertibly demonstrated before action to ameliorate it is initiated. Instead of requiring industry to prove their safety, the public bears the burden of proving that a given environmental exposure is harmful. So in other words, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that something causes cancer before any steps are taken to regulate that environmental toxin. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's the way that it works right now. Some of the barriers to effective regulation that the NIH pointed out, inadequate funding, insufficient staffing, though this is within the government itself, uh, fragmented and overlapping authorities coupled with uneven and decentralized enforcement. So you have the FDA, the EPA, you have every state has their own environmental group. In Pennsylvania, it's called the Department of Environmental Protection. I think DOP, I think it's called. There's just the excessive regulatory complexities and just quite frankly, the laws are very weak. There's very, very strong industry influence. So some of the main sources, a lot of industrial and manufacturing sources. If you work in a factory, you should probably be careful, or an industrial setting. A lot of exposure from agricultural sources. Pesticides approved for use by the EPA contain nearly 900 ingredients, most of which are toxic. We know for a fact that farmers and people living in farming communities are getting sick. They're getting cancer at much higher rates than the general public. Not just cancer, but all types of illnesses. And it's because of the exposure to these chemicals. Modern lifestyles, mobile source air pollution from cars. Automobiles are responsible for a lot of the pollution that's out there. And it's estimated that, again, about 30% of cancer resulting from air pollution comes from cars. Disinfection of the public water supply may be a concern. A lot of chemicals that are used for household pest control may be a concern. Some of the chemicals that are used for cleaning may possibly be a concern. Exposure to hazards from medical sources is a major source. Americans receive half of their total radiation from medical imaging. So, one quote here, people receiving multiple scans may accumulate doses equal to or exceeding that of Hiroshima atomic bomb survivors. So what can you do? If you do work in industry, take off your shoes before you go into the house. That's probably a good idea anyway. Take your shoes off before you get into the house. Wash your clothes separately from other clothes. It's a good idea to put a filter on your home tap. I would even suggest that you put a filter on your shower head. That might be a good idea. If you carry around water, be a good idea to carry it in stainless steel or glass, or try and find some kind of a BPA, bisphenol A, free container, or something. There's other chemicals called phthalates. It's spelled with a PH, but it's pronounced with a TH, phthalates. If you use a microwave, microwave food comes in that black plastic thing, that you're supposed to microwave it in. Take it out of that plastic, because the chemicals from that plastic will leach into the food. So put it into a ceramic or glass plastic container. I limit canned food consumption anyway, but try and find food that is BPA free in BPA free cans. This again, all these recommendations are coming directly from the NIH. Okay, so this is the federal government now telling us that we should eat organic foods as much as possible. They also tell us that we should be eating free-range meats raised without antibiotics and growth hormones. So the federal government, the National Institute of Health, is now telling us that we should be eating organic, free-range meats as much as possible. Okay. There's a website, it's called the Household Products Database. It'd be a good idea to check out. And reduce exposure to petroleum combustion byproducts by cutting back on energy consumption. Radiation. Right now, there's no strong link between cell phone usage and cancer, but probably a good idea to reduce your exposure by using a headset. It's a good idea to check your home for radon levels. In fact, in Pennsylvania, you have to have a radon check before you purchase a home. Only get medical scans when absolutely needed. If your doctor suggests that you need a medical scan, ask your doctor flat out, what is the benefit from getting this medical scan? MRIs aren't too bad. X-rays are a bit concerning. CAT scans are very concerning. One CAT scan is like, I forget exactly, but it's equal to like 100 X-rays, something like that. So if your doctor is recommending that you get a scan, ask them exactly what the benefit of getting that scan is going to be. Okay? And never, ever, ever use a tanning bed. Okay? I know that that's probably the women that use that more than the men, but you should never use a tanning bed flat out. Okay? So here is I have a link to this report right here. I would recommend that you check this out if you want to use that report for to write a paper for another class, I would recommend that you use that. It's a great resource. A couple other things I wanted to take a look at, just real quick. Talk a little bit, just some more stats on cancer. We spend a lot of money on cancer. Um, let's see. Known and suspected cause of cancer, obviously tobacco, environmental pollutants, hormone replacement therapy. Fluoridation of public water is suspected, but it's never been demonstrated. So um, I don't know. It's where I am anyway. They do not put fluoride in the water, but there may be some concerns there. Um, Again, eating a plant-based diet is very helpful in preventing cancer and other illnesses as well. Um, I think I'm going to skip through a lot of these because I don't want to talk too long. Feel free to read through these. I have this presentation posted, but there's a lot of detox programs that are out there. Some of them may work. Some of them, probably don't. Quite frankly, the best way to detoxify is to stop putting toxins into your body. Don't smoke. Limit alcohol. Don't use drugs. Um, and try and just be careful from exposing yourself to sources that we discussed earlier. Um, the body is actually pretty good at detoxifying itself. Um, there are some things that you can do. Massage is pretty good at detoxifying the body. If you remember when we watched the movie on Ayurvedic medicine, when Tom Reed went to that clinic and got all the massages and then was getting the drops up his nose, and he got a cold at the end of that. That cold, a lot of times, is actually the body detoxifying itself. So when you get a massage or an acupuncture treatment, afterwards you might feel a sore throat or you feel a cold coming on. That's actually the toxins in your body starting to be removed. So massage is really good. Skin brushing, any type of sweating exercise is good for you. Um, there's something called milk thistle. We talked about that when we talked about herbal medicine. That seems to be pretty good. Um, Fasting is pretty good. There's also something called chelation. It's actually approved by the FDA to detoxify the body of heavy metals. Um, I've never used it personally, but basically what they do is inject a solution into your body, and it kind of coagulates all the metals together, and then you excrete it out the urine. And it's considered to be a safe and effective alternative to bypass surgery for some people. And believe it or not, it has been used to treat certain children with autism. Now, this is not a cure for autism. There have been some children that have been overexposed to heavy metals, and as a result, have exhibited autistic-like symptoms. And when they used chelation, it seemed to help alleviate some of those symptoms. And again, the best thing to do is minimize your exposure by doing a lot of things that we already talked about. And then there's one more thing I want to look at real quick, and just talk briefly about, again, I'm going to kind of skip through some of these. This is just a brief description of environmental health. Um, the World Health Organization estimates that about 25% of disease burden and 23% of all deaths were attributable to modifiable environmental factors. So these are things that we can actually change. One of the things that we're want to look at briefly is alternative energy. Um, there is, in some of the reading material, we looked at the proceedings from the National Academy of Sciences, which is considered to be the premier scientific organization in our country. And according to that group, 98% of environmental scientists agree that climate change has occurred and will continue to occur as a result of human activity, what we refer to as anthropogenic climate change. It seems to be a debate in our culture. This is not a scientific debate, that is a political debate because there's a lot of financial considerations there. So, according to the scientists, there really is no debate. This is happening and will continue to happen. There are some alternative energy sources that are out there. I'm going to take a look at something that looks pretty cool. So first of all, this is called passive solar power. You may have seen something like this before. Sometimes they're called zero energy homes. And so these are homes that are completely off the grid, meaning that they're not hooked up to, Pico or another energy source. And basically it's the way that they design the home. You can see that in the wintertime when the sun is lower, the sun beams directly into the house. Usually there's a stone here on the floor that absorbs all the heat and then disperses the heat and distributes the heat throughout the rest of the house. In the summertime, when the sun is hot, higher up, there's a nice overhang, so it protects and keeps the house nice and cool. And these are pretty interesting. They can have these houses without. They usually do have heat hooked up to them just in case it gets really cold. Sometimes they'll have solar panels on the top to provide electricity. This is usually what we think of as solar energy, photovoltaics. If anybody's actually on campus, they just put an array of PV panels on one side of the campus. Don't know much about it, to be honest with you. I haven't looked into it. This is what I want to talk about, though, CSP, concentrating solar power. Uh, this almost looks like something from the future. Basically, what you have here is a whole bunch of mirrors that are set up in the desert, and they're all on an array, so the mirrors can actually move throughout the day to follow the sun. And the mirrors are all pointed to this boiler up here, and the water will run through the boiler, and then it will drive the turbine. So rather than using uh, coal to heat up the wood, to burn the coal to heat up the water, or natural gas or whatever it is that they're using, or nuclear power to heat up that water, they're just using solar power. Um, they're building one of these currently. There's a $500 billion project in northern Africa, and it's designed to provide uh, energy to Europe. So I assume they're going to run the power lines maybe through the ocean over to Italy, or maybe up through Spain this way. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do it. But this size right here, that's how big the array would have to be to provide electricity to the European Union. And a solar panel, excuse me, a solar plant this size would provide electricity to the entire world. Now, it's important to note this is just electricity. Electricity accounts for a relatively small amount of our total energy needs. Most of our energy is in the form of transportation or heat. So this does not account for those things. But electricity certainly provides for all of our computer needs and lights and things like that. So they did build a CSP out in California, but there's another area. If we put the size of this red dot in the middle of the country, a CSP the size of that red dot, we could provide for all the electrical needs in the country. Now I think I put 100 square miles. Yeah, I think that's right. It's I think it's 100. Yeah, I think it's 100 square miles total. I don't know that for sure. That for some reason I'm thinking that 100 square miles might be a misprint. But it's basically if we could do it if they really wanted to. But there isn't a whole lot of financial incentive right now to move off of fossil fuels. So the average lifespan of a power plant is about 25 to 30 years. A lot of the power plants in our country are getting close to 25 or 30 years. So we're going to spend a lot of time kind of rebuilding those power plants or building new power plants. And there's been a huge increase in power needs resulting from companies like Google or Amazon that just have these huge data processors. So the internet, again, changed everything. Google now has the world's largest privately owned solar power plant. It's a PV power plant, photovoltaic power plant. So feel free to look that up. It's kind of cool. And we're going to see more and more of these. The president signed the All of the Above plan to support alternative energy, but at the same time he did that a couple weeks ago, he also opened up the Gulf of Mexico to fracking, which does not have environmentalists are a little upset about that. So the president, he did put some good things in place, but unfortunately, what's been continuing is the demand for fossil fuels, and it's probably not going to stop anytime soon. Okay, hope this was helpful. Take care.